Think the pyramids were built by slaves? Wrong. Believe Cleopatra was Egyptian? Think again. And what if I told you that ancient Egyptians had pregnancy tests, performed brain surgery, and went on strike for better working conditions 3,000 years before labor unions existed? Yeah, your history teacher definitely skipped over that part. For the next 15 minutes, I'm going to completely shatter everything you thought you knew about ancient Egypt. We're talking about pharaohs who were actually women disguised as men, workers who got paid in beer, and construction techniques so advanced that modern engineers still can't figure them out. Forget the Hollywood version with mysterious curses and treasure-hunting adventures. The real Egypt? It's way stranger, way smarter, and way more fascinating than anything they showed you in school. Let's dive in. When you picture ancient Egypt, you probably see golden masks, massive pyramids rising from endless desert sands, and maybe some mummies wrapped in bandages shuffling around like they're in a bad horror movie. But here's the thing nobody tells you. That image is about as accurate as thinking all Americans wear cowboy hats and ride horses to work. Ancient Egypt lasted for over 3,000 years. 3,000 years! To put that in perspective, Cleopatra lived closer to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the construction of the Great Pyramid. Let that sink in for a second. The Egypt we learn about in school is usually frozen in this weird, timeless bubble, like nothing ever changed. Everyone just built pyramids and worshipped cats for 30 centuries straight. The reality? Egyptian civilization evolved, transformed, rose and fell, got conquered and reconquered, adapted and innovated across a time span so vast it makes our entire modern history look like a weekend. We're talking about a civilization that was already ancient when the Romans showed up. The pyramids were tourist attractions with graffiti from Greek visitors by the time Caesar was around. So buckle up, because we're about to take a journey through the Egypt they never taught you about. The Egypt of brilliant engineers, savvy politicians, revolutionary medical practitioners, and yes, some absolutely bizarre burial customs that would make modern people seriously question their life choices. Let's start with the biggest myth of all. The pyramids were built by slaves. This is so deeply embedded in popular culture that it's almost impossible to shake. We've all seen the movies, right? Thousands of enslaved people being whipped by cruel overseers, dragging massive stones across the desert under the blazing sun. Dramatic? Absolutely. Accurate? Not even close. Here's what archaeologists actually found. The workers who built the pyramids were paid laborers. They lived in purpose-built worker villages with their families. They received regular wages, usually in the form of bread and beer, because ancient Egypt didn't have money as we know it. And the amount of beer we're talking about wasn't just a drink with dinner. These workers were getting up to 4 liters of beer per day. Now, before you start thinking ancient Egypt was just one big frat party, understand that this beer was thick, nutritious, and had a lower alcohol content than modern beer. It was basically liquid bread, a key part of their caloric intake. The workers had access to medical care. We know this because archaeologists found skeletons with healed fractures, evidence of successful medical intervention. You don't provide healthcare to slaves. These workers also got days off, including religious festivals. They had the right to strike, and we have records of them actually doing it. There's a famous incident during the reign of Ramesses III, where workers literally walked off the job because their grain rations were late. They staged what might be the first recorded labor strike in history. And guess what? It worked. They got their back pay. But here's where it gets even interesting. The pyramid builders weren't even full-time construction workers. Most of them were farmers who worked on the pyramids during the flood season when their fields were underwater anyway. The annual Nile flood made farming impossible for several months, so instead of sitting around, farmers would work on these massive public works program. It was basically a public works program combined with a national service. They'd work for a few months, get paid, get fed, contribute to something that brought honor to their community and their gods, then go back to farming when the waters receded. And the techniques they used? Still debated by engineers today. We know they used copper tools, wooden sledges, and probably water to help move the stones. Recent discoveries suggest they may have wetted the sand in front of the sledges to reduce friction, which is genius-level physics for people who supposedly didn't even have the wheel for construction purposes yet. Some theories involve internal ramps, external ramps, spiral ramps, or combinations of all three. The honest truth? We still don't know exactly how they did it, which is kind of humbling when you think about it. Now let's talk about something your history teacher definitely glossed over. Egyptian medicine was insanely advanced, like shockingly advanced. These weren't people waving magic amulets and hoping for the best. Well, okay, they did that too, but they also performed actual medical procedures that wouldn't look out of place in a modern teaching hospital. Brain surgery. Yes, you heard that right. Archaeologists have found skulls with clear evidence of trepanation, where surgeons would drill or scrape holes into the skull. And before you think this was some barbaric torture method, look at the evidence. Many of these skulls show signs of healing, meaning the patients survived. They were performing successful neurosurgery in 3000 BC. We have medical papyri describing surgical procedures with detailed instructions on how to examine, diagnose, and treat injuries. The Edwin Smith papyri, dating to around 1600 BC, but probably copied from even older texts, reads like a modern medical textbook. It describes 48 surgical cases organized from head to toe. For each case, it provides the title, examination procedures, diagnosis, and treatment. It distinguishes between ailments that can be treated, ailments that can be fought, and ailments that cannot be treated. That's triage. That's the scientific method, thousands of years before we like to think it was invented. They understood the connection between the pulse and the heart. They knew the heart was central to the circulatory system. The Ebers papyri describes the heart and how vessels run from it to every part of the body. They didn't understand it completely, of course. They thought the heart did the thinking and the brain was just some useless organ that they literally threw away during mummification. But still, the level of anatomical knowledge was remarkable. And that pregnancy test I mentioned at the beginning? Totally real. Ancient Egyptian women would urinate on wheat and barley seeds. If the wheat grew, it was a girl. If the barley grew, it was a boy. If neither grew, she wasn't pregnant. Now, you might think this is just superstitious nonsense, but here's the kicker. Modern testing of this method showed it actually works for detecting pregnancy. The hormones in pregnant women's urine apparently do promote grain growth. The gender prediction part doesn't work, but the fact that they figured out a functional pregnancy test 3,000 years ago is absolutely wild. They had treatments for parasites, understanding that clean water was important for health. They used honey as an antibiotic, which we now know actually works because honey has antimicrobial properties. They performed dental procedures, filling cavities and dealing with abscesses. They set broken bones with splints. They prescribed medicinal plants, many of which are still used in modern medicine. Of course, they also mixed this scientific knowledge with religious practices. A treatment might include both a practical remedy like a poultice and an incantation to a healing god. But honestly, that's not that different from a modern patient who takes their prescribed medication and also prays for recovery. The human need to cover all bases hasn't changed much. Let's shift gears and talk about something that will blow your mind. Women in ancient Egypt had rights that wouldn't be matched in Western civilization for literally thousands of years. I'm not exaggerating. In many ways, Egyptian women in 2000 BC had more legal rights than American women in 1900 AD. Let that sink in for a minute. Egyptian women could own property independently. They could buy and sell goods. They could make contracts. They could initiate divorce and keep their property after divorce. They could inherit wealth equally with their brothers. They could run businesses. They could appear in court as witnesses and plaintiffs. They could make wills. All of this was completely legal and socially acceptable. Compare that to most of Western history, where women were essentially property themselves, couldn't own land, couldn't make contracts, and had basically zero legal rights independent of their fathers or husbands. Ancient Egypt was way ahead of the curve here. And it gets better. Women could hold high religious positions. The most powerful religious role in certain periods was actually the god's wife of Amun, held by a woman, often a daughter of the pharaoh. This wasn't some ceremonial title. These women wielded enormous political and economic power, controlling vast temple estates and influencing royal policy. But here's where it gets really interesting. Egypt had female pharaohs. Not queen consorts, not regents ruling for their young sons, but actual pharaohs with full royal authority. The most famous is Hatshepsut, who ruled Egypt for about 22 years during the 15th century BC. And she was so successful, so powerful, that it threatened the traditional order. Hatshepsut's story is fascinating. She started as regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, after her husband died. But instead of handing over power when the kid came of age, she basically said, "I'm doing a great job. I'm keeping this position, thanks." And she declared herself pharaoh, full pharaoh, with all the regalia and titles traditionally reserved for men. Here's the genius part. Pharaoh was a male role. The word itself is masculine. The ceremonial beard, the specific crowns and regalia, all coded male. So what did Hatshepsut do? She put on the fake ceremonial beard. She wore the male pharaonic regalia. In artwork and statues, she had herself depicted with a male body. She used male grammatical forms in inscriptions. She essentially said, fine, if Pharaoh must be male, then I'm male now. Deal with it. And it worked. She ruled successfully for over 2 decades, overseeing major building projects, establishing important trade networks, and maintaining stability. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is still one of the most impressive architectural achievements in Egypt. She wasn't just keeping the seat warm, she was one of the most successful pharaohs in Egyptian history. But after her death, someone tried to erase her from history. Many of her statues were destroyed, her name chiseled off monuments, her achievements attributed to her predecessor or successor. For a long time, historians thought this was Thutmose III getting revenge after being overshadowed for so long. Recent research suggests it might have been later pharaohs who were uncomfortable with the precedent of a successful female pharaoh and wanted to remove her from the official record. Either way, the attempt failed. We know about Hatshepsut. Her story survived. And she wasn't the only one. Cleopatra is famous, of course, though most people don't realize she was actually Cleopatra VII, meaning there were 6 other important women with that name before her. There was also Sobek-Neferu in the 12th dynasty, Nefertiti, who may have briefly ruled after Akhenaten's death, and Tausret in the 19th dynasty. Female rulers weren't common, but they weren't impossible either. Speaking of Cleopatra, let's bust another myth. Cleopatra was not ethnically Egyptian. She was Greek. Macedonian Greek, to be specific, descended from Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals who took over Egypt after Alexander died. The Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt for about 300 years, but they were culturally Greek. They spoke Greek at court, followed Greek customs, and famously intermarried within the family to keep the bloodline pure. Cleopatra was actually the first Ptolemaic ruler who even bothered to learn Egyptian, the language of the people they'd been ruling for 3 centuries. That's how disconnected they were. But Cleopatra was brilliant. She spoke 9 languages. She was educated in mathematics, philosophy, oratory, and astronomy. She wasn't the exotic seductress of Hollywood legend. She was a shrewd political operator trying to maintain Egypt's independence in an era when Rome was swallowing up the entire Mediterranean world. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony weren't romantic fairy tales, they were strategic political alliances. She was using Rome's internal power struggles to protect Egypt. It almost worked. Now let's talk about something that makes modern people uncomfortable. Ancient Egyptian religion was weird, like genuinely bizarre in ways that textbooks usually sanitize. You learned about the animal-headed gods, right? Ra with his falcon head, Anubis with his jackal head, Bastet the cat goddess. Seems exotic, but relatively straightforward. Except it wasn't straightforward at all. Egyptian theology was incredibly complex and often contradictory. They had multiple creation myths that directly conflicted with each other, and nobody seemed bothered by this. Different cities had different patron gods who were the most important god in that region. Sometimes gods merged together. Amun-Ra wasn't Amun or Ra, it was a fusion of both. Sometimes the same god had completely different attributes in different time periods or locations. And the animal association? Way more complex than this god has a dog head. Animals were seen as physical manifestations of divine principles. The gods themselves existed in a realm beyond physical form, but they could inhabit animals as living representations. So when you see a temple full of mummified cats, it's not because Egyptians were crazy cat people, though they definitely were that too. It's because each cat was potentially a vessel for Bastet's divine essence. This led to some practices that seem absolutely insane by modern standards. Wealthy Egyptians would pay to have animals mummified and buried as offerings to the gods. We're not talking a few cats here and there. Archaeologists have found catacombs containing millions of mummified animals. Millions! Cats, dogs, birds, crocodiles, bulls, even fish. There's a site called Saqqara with underground galleries containing an estimated 8 million mummified animals, mostly dogs and jackals associated with Anubis. The mummification process itself is another thing that's usually sanitized in textbooks. You learned it was elaborate, right? That they removed the organs and put them in canopic jars? True, but let's talk about the details they left out. The brain was removed by shoving a hook up through the nose and basically scrambling it, then pulling it out in pieces. The ancient historian Herodotus described embalmers as having specialized jobs. Some made the incision to remove organs, some handled the evisceration, some did the wrapping. And these were distinct professional roles. The whole process took 70 days. the body was covered in natron, a naturally occurring salt, to dry it out completely. Then came the wrapping, with hundreds of yards of linen, with amulets placed at specific points, magic spells were recited. The internal organs, except for the brain, which was thrown away, and the heart, which was left in place, were individually mummified and stored in those canopic jars, each protected by a different god. But here's something really strange. Poor people couldn't afford this elaborate process, so they developed cheaper alternatives. The absolute cheapest method? Just flush out the intestines with a liquid, cover the body in natron for the minimum time, wrap it quickly, and done. No organ removal, minimal preservation. These bargain mummies often didn't last, which is why almost all surviving mummies are from wealthy individuals. And the whole point of this elaborate process? The afterlife. Egyptians were absolutely obsessed with the afterlife. Not in a morbid way, but in a "this is literally the most important thing ever" way. Your life on Earth was just preparation for eternal life after death. But unlike many religions where everyone goes to the same afterlife, the Egyptian afterlife required work. First, your body had to be preserved so your soul had somewhere to return to. Then you needed your tomb filled with everything you might need in the afterlife: food, drinks, furniture, clothes, servants. Except instead of killing actual servants, which some other ancient cultures did, Egyptians invented shabtis, little figurines that would magically come to life and do work for you in the afterlife. Some wealthy people were buried with hundreds of these magical servant dolls. Then came the judgment. Your heart would be weighed against the feather of Maat, goddess of truth and justice. If your heart was heavy with sin, it would outweigh the feather, and you'd be devoured by Ammit, a demon that was part crocodile, part lion, part hippo. If your heart was pure and balanced the feather, you'd pass into the field of reeds, basically paradise, where you'd live eternally doing the things you loved in life, but without any of the hardships. But here's the loophole. You could cheat. The Book of the Dead, which wasn't actually a book but a collection of spells and instructions that could be customized for each person, included spells to make your heart lighter during the weighing. There were spells to prevent your heart from testifying against you. It was like having a lawyer arguing your case at judgment. If you could afford a good Book of the Dead with all the right spells properly written, you significantly improved your chances of reaching paradise, regardless of how you actually lived your life. This created an entire industry: scribes who specialized in writing books of the dead, artists who illustrated them, priests who knew which spells were most effective. It was ancient Egypt's version of a luxury good. And yes, this means the afterlife was partially play to win, which feels very on brand for human civilization across all eras. Let's talk about daily life for a minute, because this is where things get relatable despite the 3,000-year gap. Ancient Egyptians worried about their appearance. They used makeup, both men and women. That iconic black eyeliner you see in every Egyptian artwork? Totally real. They made coal from ground minerals, and it wasn't just decorative. It actually helped protect eyes from the sun's glare and may have had antimicrobial properties that helped prevent eye infections, which were common in that dusty environment. They shaved their heads and wore wigs because it was cooler and more hygienic. They used scented oils and perfumes. They worried about body odor and bad breath, creating early forms of deodorant and mouthwash. They removed body hair using early forms of waxing or sugaring. They had beauty standards and fashion trends that changed over time. Egyptian fashion was actually pretty practical for the climate. Light linen clothing, usually white to reflect heat. The wealthy had pleated linen that required significant skill to make. Everyone from pharaohs to farmers wore sandals made from papyrus or leather, though the poor often went barefoot. And that iconic heavy jewelry you see on mummies and statues? The wealthy really did wear that. Gold, semi-precious stones, intricate beadwork. It was status signaling, ancient style. Kids played with toys. We found dolls, balls, spitting tops, and board games. Adults played board games too, especially Senet, which was so popular that people were buried with their game boards so they could play in the afterlife. We know the basic rules of Senet from tomb paintings and written descriptions, and you can actually buy modern versions of it today. They kept pets. Cats, obviously, were beloved and often mummified when they died, but also dogs, which had names like Brave One or Good Herdsman. There's even evidence of pet monkeys. Rich people had exotic animals as status symbols because apparently that's a universal constant across all human civilizations. They threw parties with music, dancing, and lots of wine. They had professional entertainers, musicians, dancers, acrobats. Some tomb paintings show party scenes that look absolutely wild, with guests wearing elaborate wigs and cone-shaped objects on their heads that historians think might have been scented fat that would melt throughout the evening, releasing perfume, though that particular theory is debated. They told stories and had literature. The Tale of Sinuhe is an Egyptian adventure story from around 1900 BC that was so popular it was copied and recopied for centuries. They had love poetry that sounds remarkably modern in its emotions and concerns. They had wisdom literature giving advice on how to live a good life. They had ghost stories and magical tales. In other words, they were people. Sophisticated people living in a complex society with its own customs and quirks, but people nonetheless. They weren't alien or incomprehensible. They worried about their jobs, their families, their health, their appearance. They celebrated good times and mourned losses. They hoped for a better future and remembered their past. The decline of ancient Egyptian civilization is usually taught as this sudden collapse, maybe with some vague references to invasions. The reality is far more gradual and complex. Egypt was conquered multiple times by different groups over many centuries. Each time, elements of Egyptian culture persisted and mixed with the new rulers' cultures. The Nubians conquered Egypt and became the 25th dynasty, ruling as pharaohs while maintaining Egyptian traditions. The Assyrians invaded but didn't stick around long. The Persians conquered Egypt twice, ruling as pharaohs during what's called the Late Period. Alexander the Great conquered Egypt from the Persians, was welcomed as a liberator, and was declared pharaoh. After his death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ruled for 3 centuries, as we discussed. Finally, Rome conquered Egypt in 30 BC after Cleopatra and Mark Antony's defeat. Egypt became a Roman province, but even then, Egyptian culture didn't just disappear. The Romans adopted Egyptian gods into their pantheon. Isis became one of the most popular goddesses across the Roman Empire. Egyptian architectural styles influenced Roman building. Obelisks were shipped to Rome itself. Christianity gradually spread through Egypt, and many Egyptian religious concepts influenced early Christian theology. The Ankh symbol influenced the development of the Christian cross. The concept of judgment after death, weighing of souls, a paradise for the virtuous, these ideas had parallels in Egyptian religion that early Christians in Egypt would have been familiar with. When Arab Muslim armies conquered Egypt in the 7th century AD, that's usually considered the final end of ancient Egyptian civilization. The Egyptian language gradually died out, replaced by Arabic. The old religion was completely replaced by Islam and Christianity. The knowledge of hieroglyphics was lost. For over 1,000 years, nobody could read ancient Egyptian writing. But even then, the Great Pyramid still stood. The Sphinx was still there, buried to its neck in sand, but surviving. The temples remained, even if nobody understood the writing on their walls anymore. The ancient monuments endured, silent witnesses to a civilization that had lasted 3,000 years. It wasn't until the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799, with its message in 3 scripts, including hieroglyphics and Greek, that we finally cracked the code and could read ancient Egyptian again. Suddenly, all those temples and tombs could speak to us across the millennia. The voices of people who lived and died thousands of years ago became audible again. And what did we learn? That ancient Egyptians were brilliant engineers who built structures we still can't fully explain. That they were skilled doctors who understood anatomy and practiced surgery. That they were complex people with sophisticated beliefs, hopes, fears, and dreams. That they created art of astounding beauty and wrote literature that still resonates today. That they weren't the mysterious alien civilization of popular imagination, but rather humans like us, facing universal human challenges with innovation, faith, and determination. So what's the real lesson here? That everything you learned in school about ancient Egypt was probably a simplified, sanitized, and often just plain wrong version of reality. The real Egypt was stranger, more complex, more human, and infinitely more interesting than the version in textbooks. These were people who performed brain surgery and believed magic spells would protect them in the afterlife, who built massive pyramids with copper tools and worshipped cat-headed goddesses, who gave women property rights millennia before most cultures and also thought a god with a crocodile head controlled the Nile floods. They were walking contradictions by modern standards, but that's what makes them fascinating. The next time someone asks you about ancient Egypt, you can tell them it wasn't all pyramids and mummies. It was a living, breathing civilization that evolved over 3,000 years. It was workers getting paid in beer and going on strike. It was female pharaohs ruling in fake beards. It was doctors performing surgery and writing medical textbooks. It was regular people trying to live good lives and secure a happy afterlife. It was all of this and so much more. If you enjoyed uncovering the truth about ancient Egypt, the version they never taught you in school, smash that like button. And if you want more deep dives into real history, the fascinating details that textbooks skip over, the human stories behind ancient civilizations, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we've got a whole world of hidden history to explore together. History isn't just dates and dead people. It's stories of real human beings facing challenges, making discoveries, building societies, and leaving legacies that echo across thousands of years. And those stories deserve to be told in full, with all the weird, wonderful, and sometimes disturbing details included. Thanks for watching, and remember, the past is way more interesting than anyone told you. See you next time.